The auctioneer dropped the gavel at $70, and the biggest man on the lot laughed at him in front of the whole county. Gus Lindquist did not laugh back. He just lowered his hand, the bid already his, and looked at the thing he had bought, a massive cast iron floor safe, squat and broad as a kitchen stove and tall as a man's waist. Its whole front bricked over and packed solid with gray concrete by some hand long dead, so that there was no door to see, no dial, no handle, nothing but a rust-streaked iron block with a skin of old masonry across its face. A ton of cemented scrap worth nothing that a crowbar would slide right off of that 40 grown people had walked past all morning. And that Gus Lindquist had just paid $70 to own. It was a cool, bright Saturday morning, the 9th of October, 1973, at the salvage auction on the old fairgrounds lot at the edge of Tallow Creek in Brand County, Iowa. Gus was 69 years old, lean and straight through the back from a lifetime of close and heavy work, just beginning to stoop. With a deeply lined face burned brown by the sun, short gray hair under a flat tweed cap, and pale, steady eyes that did not move fast. His hands were broad and thick at the knuckle, a man's hands that had both turned a delicate dial and laid 10,000 bricks. Gus Lindquist had opened and rebuilt safes and vaults for 40 years and laid brick and mixed mortar the whole time beside the trade. It was the kind of lot that comes after a place is cleared. The old Skoglund house on Cedar Street had stood shut and empty for years, and that fall the county had ordered it torn down and the salvage sold off to settle what was owed. So they had hauled the leavings out to the fairgrounds and laid them in rows on the gravel under the open sky. The iron bedsteads and the plow points and the coils of fence wire and the dead machinery, and the safe dragged up out of the cellar where it had sat bolted to the floor longer than anyone could remember, set down at the end of the last row in the bright morning, looking like the most hopeless thing on the place. The man who laughed was Roy Tessman, who ran the biggest scrap and salvage outfit between the river and the county line, a heavy-set man of 51 in a loud red checked shirt and a wide pale cap, his face clean-shaven and ruddy, a silver buckle the size of a saucer at his belt. $70, Roy said, loud, so the people along the rope could hear it. $70 for a block of busted concrete you'd need a crane to haul off. Old-timer, somebody filled that thing with cement 40 years ago because it was junk then. You can't get into it, can't sell it, can't even lift it. You just bought the heaviest boat anchor in Brand County. He coined the name right there, and it stuck to Gus for the rest of that October. The anchor. The people laughed because Roy laughed, the way a crowd does. Gus stood through it all without a change in his face, one broad hand resting flat on the cold concrete skin of the safe, and let the laughter wash over him and pass, the way weather passes a man who has decided to stand in it. Now, if you have ever watched a quiet, capable man get talked over by a loud one, if you have ever known somebody whose skill the world used when it was stuck and forgot the rest of the time, then you already understand what this channel is about, and you might take a second to subscribe, because the people who stay for stories like Gus's are exactly who Iron Hook Stories was built for. Gus said nothing. He had learned a long time ago that work does not answer to noise. What none of them knew, what Roy Tessman could not have known, grinning in his good cap, was that Gus had walked the rows an hour before the sale and stopped dead at that safe, and his whole trade had risen up in him at the sight of it. The crowd saw a ruined block. Gus saw the work. He had laid his hand flat on the masonry and read it the way a mason reads another mason's wall, And the brick was not the careless rubble a man throws at a thing to be rid of it. It was laid level, coursed clean, the joints struck smooth, slow, careful work done by somebody who wanted it to last. Nobody buries a broken safe under good brickwork. You bury a good one. Gus would have it open before the night was out, and what he found behind that careful concrete would change how the whole county remembered a dead man. Gus had come up hard. He was born in 1904 in a brickyard town on the Mississippi and went to work at 14 carrying hod for the masons, learning the trowel before he learned much else. A locksmith took him on as a young man for his patient hands and his good ear, and across the years he made himself into a safe and vault man. The rare tradesman a bank called when a time lock froze or a combination died with the only man who knew it, who could lay his fingers on a dial and listen a thing open. But he never put the trowel down. He knew, as few men alive did, exactly how iron and brick and mortar went together to keep a thing safe. His wife Hannah had died of a stroke in 1966. And they had buried a son grown in the war before that, and after Hannah was gone, Gus lived alone at the edge of town with his tools and his quiet. The county had a use for his hands and no use at all for his opinion. He knew that. He bought the safe anyway. He bought it because he could read it. To a man who had opened safes all his life, that iron block told a story the crowd could not hear. A safe that fails is still a safe with a door. You can see the door, the dial, the place where a thief or a fire or a careless heir had been at it. This one had no door to see because somebody had taken the trouble to wall the door away, and a man does not wall away nothing. Only a man seals a safe on purpose. When he has put something inside it he cannot bear to lose and cannot leave where it can be found. Something had been sealed in there. He could not yet have told you what. But a man does not stay 40 years in a trade by ignoring what his own hands are telling him plain. If you've made it this far into Gus's story, hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I've been waiting to tell you. He let them sell the bedsteads and the plow points and the coils of wire, and he waited. When the auctioneer finally got to the safe and asked $5 to start it. The crowd laughed, Roy called out his joke about the boat anchor, and not one other hand went up. Gus raised one finger. $70, the auctioneer said, more to be rid of it than anything, and the gavel came down. It took both auction helpers and a chain hoist rigged off the bed of a truck to swing the better part of a ton of iron and concrete up onto a borrowed flatbed. And Gus drove the 11 miles home at 20 miles an hour with the flatbed riding hard on its springs behind him, and he did not hurry. There is a kind of patience that looks like slowness right up until the moment it doesn't, and Gus Lindquist had a whole lifetime of it riding in the cab with him. The story got around Brand County before Gus's flatbed was off the Fairgrounds Road. By Monday, people who had not spoken 20 words to him in years stopped him outside the hardware store to ask, grinning, how the boat anchor was treating him. Merle Hoffer, who ran the grain scale, said it plainer than the rest, that there was nothing in a safe a man feels with concrete, and Gus had paid $70 to haul home a tombstone. Gus was buying a sack of mortar mix and a cold chisel and did not look up. "We'll see," he said. That was the whole of his answer, and by Wednesday the anchor was what they called it down at the cafe. Said warm enough, but said all the same. He had spent 40 years learning that a thing is either built true or it isn't, and that the noise a crowd makes has nothing to do with which. But Gus did not break it open the night he brought it home. For the better part of a week, the safe sat on a low cart against the wall of his back shop, and every evening after supper he gave it an hour, learning the thing before he laid a chisel to it, the way he read everything, slow and square and certain, cleaning the cellar dirt off the iron and brick, studying the masonry under a strong lamp, tapping, listening. While down at the cafe they laughed and asked if he'd gotten his tombstone to give up its ghost yet. Albert Skoglund had been a fixture in Tallow Creek the better part of 40 years, and the township had buried him with a short service and a long opinion. The opinion was that Albert had died a strange, miserly old recluse. The bank cashier who had stood at the window the day the Tallow Creek Bank went under in the bad years and watched honest people lose the small savings they had trusted him to keep, who quit the work after and never went back, let his wife wear the same coat 10 winters, turned every caller off his porch, and trusted not one living soul. His wife had passed before him. His only child, a daughter named Edith, had married out and moved off, and the talk was that he had soured so hard she rarely came, and had died alone with nothing but a shut-up house and a cellar full of junk. Gus had known Albert a little, as one quiet man knows another, and had once been out to that cellar to grate a window and seen the floor safe down there, plain iron, standing open and empty against the wall. Gus had never thought Albert a miser. He had thought him a man carrying a weight he would not set down in front of anybody. What none of the rest of them ever asked was what a man who had watched a vault feel the people who believed in it might do after, with whatever little he could put right, or where he would keep it. The answer had been standing in his shut cellar the whole time, walled in brick, too heavy to steal and too plain to wonder at. When he had studied it long enough, the 6th evening, the lamp set so the light fell square across the masonry, Gus pulled up a stool and sat down in front of the safe the way another man might sit down across from somebody he had a long talk waiting with. He had tapped every inch of it by then. The sides rang dead and solid, iron through and through. But across the front, when he rapped with the back of the chisel, there was a different sound in one broad rectangle, a deeper, hollower note, the note of a thick door with a chamber of air behind it. He had found the door right where a floor safe's door belongs, and it had never been forced. The masonry ran smooth and unbroken over the top of it, which meant somebody had closed that door, locked it, and then walled the whole front away so no one would ever know a door was there. Something in his chest went very quiet and very sure. A man does not wall a door away that careful to keep nothing behind it. He went at the brick first, slow, with the respect one mason gives the hand that laid another's wall. He set the cold chisel in a joint and tapped, and the old mortar gave up its grip a grain at a time, and the first brick came loose in his palm hole. He took the front off course by course, the lamp following his hands, and behind the single skin of brick was the concrete, packed tight against the iron, maybe 4 inches of it and no more. Not a careless dumping, but a measured facing. Smoothed flat while it was wet by a trowel he could still read the strokes of. The cold lived in his old knuckles like weather, but his hands did not shake, because a man who has done heavy and close work 10,000 times does it long after the rest of him has gotten old. He broke the concrete out in pieces, working a wider chisel behind each chunk and letting it come. And one by one, the years fell away onto the bench until the bare face of the safe stood clear in the lamplight for the first time in 40 years. The heavy iron door, the round combination dial, the long handle, all of it sound, none of it forced. Gus cleaned the dial with a rag and a little oil and set his broad fingers on it light as he had on 100 bank vaults, and closed his eyes and listened. He had no combination. He did not need one. An old vault man who has listened 1,000 locks open can feel the gates fall into line one by one if he is patient and his hands have not forgotten. A little before 11, the last wheel dropped under his fingertips with a small, sure click he felt more than heard, and Gus turned the handle. And the heavy door of a safe the whole county had buried as scraps swung open on its hinges, slow and smooth, into the lamplight. The chamber was deep and dry and dark, and it was not empty. Packed careful and square inside, wrapped against the years, was everything a frightened man had walled away from the worst time of his life, sitting whole where no run on a bank and no creditor and no thief would ever reach it. Gus sat with his hand on the open iron door and looked into the bottom of a $70 safe the township had laughed at as a tombstone. He took the things out one at a time and laid them on the bench under the lamp, slow, handling each like something another man had trusted to the dark for 40 years. There were 3 kinds of things sealed in that safe. The first was the money. Not flung in loose, but a careful man's whole reserve, wrapped against it damp in oilcloth, banded bills of the old large-size kind, a great many of them, and beneath them a heavy cloth roll that clinked when he lifted it, gold coin, double eagles and half eagles, set by one at a time across whatever good years there were, and under that a paper tube of silver dollars worn smooth. Gus was no appraiser, but he had handled enough hard money to know he was looking at far more than the whole Scugland salvage had brought that morning, and the gold alone in 1973 was worth a great deal past the face stamped on it. The second thing was the papers, sealed flat in a stiff oilcloth folder, a sheaf of government savings bonds never cashed, the clear deed to the house on Cedar Street, free of any lien, and a thick hand-kept ledger, the pages ruled and filled in a small, square hand, a long list of names, each with a sum beside it that Gus did not understand at first. Folded in with the ledger, in that same square hand, was a single sheet headed for Edith and the rest. Gus set that sheet aside unread for the moment, because it had a daughter's name on it and felt like a thing a stranger ought to come to last. The third thing was the letter, one folded page, sealed in its own envelope and set upright at the front of the chamber where a man would see it first when the door came open, and on the outside in that same hard square hand. It said only, "To whoever opens this, if my Edith cannot." Gus worked the envelope open and read what a dead man had written for whoever reached it. Albert Scugland wrote that he had stood at the cashier's window the day the Tallow Creek Bank failed, and watched men he had known all his life lose the savings they had carried into him on faith. And it carried the shame of it ever after, though no fault of the ruin was his. The ledger, he wrote, was the list of those depositors and what each had lost, and across 40 quiet years he had set aside what he could, a little at a time, meaning to make as many of those names good as one man's life would stretch to. The gold and the bonds were that fund. Sealed in the one heavy thing in the house that could not be carried off, and bricked away by his own hand so that no second failure and no creditor of his own could ever empty it before its work was done. He had let the town call him a miser, he wrote, because a sealed door keeps its secret best behind a sour name. He asked, plain, that the ledger be honored as far as the money reached, and the rest go to his daughter Edith, who he had been too proud and too ashamed to tell while he lived. Below his name he had written it out, "Tell her I was never hoarding it." I was paying back a debt that was never mine, so an honest man's word would still mean something in this town. Gus read it twice through, and the only man in Brand County who had ever thought Albert Skoglund was carrying something now held the proof of it in two hands. Gus did the only thing a man like Gus would do. The next morning he went to the county and asked who had handled the Skoglund estate, and over the better part of a month they traced Edith to a town 2 states off and put into a lawyer's hands what had come out of a $70 safe, every coin and bond and the ledger entire. Gus did not keep a cent of it, and a few in town thought him a fool a second time for it. He let them. A thing asked for plain ought to be honored. Edith Skoglund's car came to Tallow Creek on a gray morning that November, a careworn woman of about 48, her brown hair going gray, and when the lawyer laid her father's letter and the ledger on the table and she read them through, she put one hand flat over her mouth and her eyes filled, and she did not say anything for a long time. She had buried her father believing the town's story, and worse, her own, that he had turned hard and small and shut her out for nothing, and the letter told her instead that the hardness had been a wall he built on purpose, to keep whole a thing he meant to set right. She asked to meet the man who had opened it, and Gus came to the lawyer's door in his shirt sleeves and stood there plain while she thanked him with her voice shaking, and all he said was that her father had sealed it the way a man seals a thing he means to last, and that things sealed that careful generally do. That winter the county quietly carried out what the ledger asked. As far as the gold and bonds would reach, and the old depositors still living or their grown children were handed back a thing they had given up for lost 40 years before, and not one of them ever again called Albert Skoglund a miser. Word of it went around Brand County the same way the laughter had, only quieter, and the people who had called Gus a fool let the name anchor drop and did not pick it up again. Roy Tessman was not run out of the county and was not made a villain. He was simply a man who had laughed loud at a thing he did not understand. And the next time he held court at the cafe counter the others did not lean in so far. Gus never said a word against him. Being right was the whole of what he had wanted, and being right had brought a decent dead man's name back up out of the dirt, which is more than being right usually does. Edith kept the safe. She would not have it scrapped or broken up. She had Gus brick the front back as her father had left it, the brick relaid clean over the patched concrete, and she set it in the corner of her front room and told her own grown children, who would carry it after her, that the outside was what the hard years and the shame had made of her father, and the inside was what he had been the whole time underneath. And on a still evening that next summer, the light going gold across the open country, Gus Lindquist drove out to look in on her, and Edith brought him inside, and there in the corner, in the last of the sun, stood the bricked-up safe, whole and sealed again. Gus was 69 years old, a man the township had laughed at one whole October, and he stood quiet in front of it a long moment, and laid one broad, careful hand flat on the cool brick, and then nodded once, the way a man nods at a job that was done right. The work had said it for him, the way work always did. A man walls the strong box shut so the good will keep for the ones who come after, even when he cannot say so himself. And the world rarely knows what was carried through the hard years until somebody troubles to open what no one else would. So I'll leave it to you. Was Gus Lindquist right to hand back every dollar of it without keeping a cent for himself? Or was that one decency too far in a world that had laughed at him for nothing? Tell me which one in the comments and I'll read them.